The boardroom gleamed with cold perfection, the polished mahogany table reflecting the overhead lights like a mirror, the air thick with ambition and power. Bill Anderson stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding the room without effort. At 52, he was the embodiment of success, the boy from a small town who had clawed his way into becoming one of the most influential men in the world. His Italian suit fit like armor, every stitch declaring wealth and authority around him. 20 executives sat forward in their chairs, notebooks open, pens ready, their faces a mixture of awe and eagerness. Ladies and gentlemen, Bill's voice rang out, deep and steady, carrying the kind of certainty that had made him the titan he was. This merger marks the dawn of a new era, with Anderson Technologies leading the charge. We will dominate medical innovation for the next decade. His words slid across the room like steel, polished and undeniable. Applause followed, sharp and obedient, filling the space with the sound of victory. Bill smiled, a calculated expression, the kind he had perfected for cameras, investors, and enemies alike. He was untouchable, or so it seemed. The moment hung in the air like a banner of triumph. Then came the sound, soft at first, almost fragile, the squeak of a hinge. The boardroom door creaked open, breaking the rhythm of power. All heads turned, frowns forming at the intrusion. No one entered this room uninvited. No one dared to. Yet in the doorway stood a small figure, a girl no older than 7. Her faded blue dress brushing against scuffed shoes. Her dark hair was tied back in a ponytail that had come loose at the edges, strands clinging to her damp cheeks. She looked out of place against the steel and glass fortress of power, yet her presence seemed to pull the oxygen from the air. The executives exchanged confused glances. Bill's assistant began to rise, moving to usher her out, but the girl's voice, though small, carried with unexpected weight. "I need to talk to Mr. Anderson." The room fell still. Silence sharper than the applause had been moments earlier. Bill blinked, his hand tightening on the edge of the table. "Young lady," he said, his tone heavy with practiced patience, "this is a private meeting. If you're here selling Girl Scout cookies, my assistant will see to it that you're taken care of outside." The attempt at humor earned a few nervous chuckles, but the girl didn't so much as flinch. She walked forward, each step deliberate, the straps of a worn backpack pressed against her small shoulders. She stopped at the edge of the table, her chin tilted upward, eyes fixed on Bill's face with unnerving steadiness. "My name is Ella Johnson," she said, her voice carrying more conviction than anyone in that room expected from someone so small. The laughter died instantly. "My mom's name was Rachel Johnson," she continued, her gaze never wavering. "She died 3 months ago. Before she did, she told me something." Ella's small hands tightened on the straps of her backpack. "She said you're my father." The words dropped like a stone into the silence, ripples spreading through the room. Pens stilled, throats tightened. 20 pairs of eyes swung toward the man at the head of the table. The man who had never faltered in the face of corporate battles, political negotiations, or media storms. Bill Anderson's face drained of color. His confident stance faltered as though the ground beneath him had shifted. For the first time in his career, for the first time anyone in that room could remember, the untouchable billionaire looked human, rattled, shaken, and utterly unprepared. Bill Anderson's knuckles tightened around the polished edge of the table. His mind a storm, though his face tried to remain composed. He had been ambushed in boardrooms before by rivals, investors, journalists with uncomfortable questions, but never like this, never by a child. The executives sat frozen, their suits and ties suddenly feeling like costumes in a theater. None of them had prepared to act in. The little girl's words hung in the air, heavier than any financial deal Bill had ever announced. "My father," she had said. 3 syllables that had cracked the walls of his empire. For a heartbeat, Bill considered brushing it off, laughing, dismissing her as a confused child. But there was something in her gaze that stopped him, something disturbingly familiar. Those eyes, deep and unwavering, pulled him back to a diner from years ago, a smile across the counter, a woman with dreams too large for her paycheck. Rachel Johnson. He had buried the memory, convinced himself it was nothing more than a forgotten chapter. Yet here it was, flesh and blood, standing in front of him. The CFO cleared his throat, trying to cut the tension. "Mr. Anderson, should we reschedule?" His voice was tentative, as if speaking loudly might shatter the illusion of order. Bill swallowed, his throat dry. "No," he said, Though his voice lacked its usual steel, his gaze dropped back to Ella, who stood with the kind of poise that seemed impossible for a child her age. She didn't look away, didn't shuffle nervously like children usually did when confronted by strangers. Instead, she stepped closer, sliding a small, worn photograph from her backpack. She placed it on the table, her little hand pressing it down with quiet finality. Bill's breath caught. The photo was old, edges frayed, but unmistakable. Himself, years younger, his arm around Rachel, both smiling at the camera as if the future had belonged to them. He hadn't seen that picture. In years hadn't wanted to. She kept this, Ella said softly, though her words struck like thunder. She said you were important. She said you were my father even if you didn't want to be. The room erupted in whispers, executives shifting in their seats. Some stealing glances at Bill with barely disguised curiosity, others looking away. As though witnessing something to raw dot, Bill raised a hand sharply, halting security, who had begun to move toward the girl. "Stay where you are," he commanded, his tone breaking for the first time. Ella's eyes narrowed just slightly, her voice trembling, but never breaking. "Mom told me you'd pretend it wasn't true. She said you'd want proof. She told me about the mark on your shoulder, the one shaped like Florida." Bill froze. A murmur swept through the room. That detail wasn't public. Hardly anyone knew. Only someone who had seen him up close, intimate, vulnerable. Rachel had known. His legs felt unsteady, and he sank into the leather chair behind him. For once, he had no rehearsed speech, no polished response. His empire had always been built on control of markets, control of narratives, control of himself. But now, staring into the eyes of this child, control was slipping like water through his fingers. "What do you want?" he asked finally, his voice raw, stripped of power. The girl lifted her chin, her reply quiet yet devastating. "I don't want your money. I don't even want your company. I just don't want to go to foster care on Monday. You're my last chance." The words shattered him more than any lawsuit, any market crash, any betrayal. For the first time in his career, William Anderson, the untouchable billionaire, felt utterly powerless. Outside, the world of glass and steel hummed with business as usual, but inside that boardroom, something far greater than profit or power had just been set in motion. And though Bill didn't yet know it, his carefully constructed empire would never be the same again. The silence in the boardroom lingered like a storm cloud long after Ella's words had fallen. The executives filed out in uneasy silence when Bill ordered the meeting adjourned, their whispers trailing down the hallway like wildfire. No one dared speak to him directly, but all of them knew they had just witnessed the unraveling of a secret big enough to shake Anderson Technologies to its foundation. Bill, for once, did not care about the whispers. He sat at the table, staring at the photograph Ella had placed before him, his thoughts a torrent of memories and shame he had long buried. Meanwhile, in the lobby below, Dorothy Williams sat stiffly on a sleek leather chair, her worn purse clutched tightly in her lap. The grandeur of Anderson Technologies headquarters loomed around her gleaming marble floors. Walls of glass, a fountain that whispered in the corner. It was a temple of money and power. Yet Dorothy sat rooted like an oak, out of place but unshaken. At 72, she had spent decades navigating hospitals, fending off arrogant doctors, demanding justice for patients and staff alike. A security guard stood before her now, his voice low but sharp. "Ma'am, you need to explain how you and the child got into this building. Visitors don't just walk into the executive floor." Dorothy lifted her chin, her tired but defiant eyes locking onto his. "Young man, I face men with more authority than you in operating rooms at midnight. Don't think for a second you intimidate me. That child belongs upstairs, and you'll understand why soon enough." The guard shifted uneasily. Something about her composure made it hard to press further. Still, his hand hovered near the radio at his belt, ready to call in reinforcements. Then, just as he opened his mouth, the elevator chimed. Two executives stepped out, their voices hushed but urgent. "She said Rachel Johnson," one murmured. "Anderson's reaction, you saw it. It's true, isn't it?" The other shook his head, but their voices carried, and Dorothy heard every word. Her grip on her purse tightened. She had promised Rachel on that hospital bed where life was slipping away that she would bring Ella. Here, that she would make the powerful man upstairs face the truth he had ignored for too long. She was not about to fail that promise now. Upstairs, Bill finally rose from his chair. His voice heavy. "Bring the woman up," he told his assistant, Bobby, who had been lingering anxiously by the door. Now, and not a word to anyone. Minutes later, Dorothy entered the boardroom, her steps steady, Ella close by her side. The contrast between the frail elderly woman and the towering billionaire was stark. Yet when Dorothy's eyes locked onto Bill's, it was she who seemed to carry the greater authority. "I'm sorry for the intrusion, Mr. Anderson," Dorothy began, her voice strong despite the tremor of age. "But I gave Rachel my word. When she was dying, she made me promise to bring Ella to you. She has no one else, and come Monday, Child Services will take her. I could not let that happen." Bill's jaw clenched. He wanted to lash out, to demand why this had been forced upon him so brutally in the middle of his empire's most critical moment. But as Dorothy continued, he found himself unable to interrupt. "You may have forgotten Rachel," Dorothy said, her voice cutting like glass, "but she never forgot you. Not once. She wrote letters every month, for years, letters you never answered. She told Ella about you. She told her you were a great man, even when you abandoned her. Do you understand what that means, Mr. Anderson? A dying woman still gave you honor you never earned." The sting of her words was unbearable. Bill looked away, ashamed, as Ella clutched Dorothy's hand, her eyes wide, watching him not as a CEO, but as the man who had failed her mother. "What do you expect me to do?" Bill finally asked, his voice raw. "Everything you're saying, it changes everything. My company, my marriage, my life. This is chaos." Dorothy stepped closer, her frail frame casting a long shadow across the polished floor. "I expect you to do what you should have done 7 years ago. Be a father, not a businessman, not a figurehead, a father." Bill's hands trembled against the table. The weight of expectation, of responsibility he had never wanted pressed against his chest. For the first time in years, he felt cornered, not by competitors or board members, but by the truth he could no longer escape. Then Ella spoke again, her voice smaller now, but still steady. "Mom said you might not want me, but she told me to try. She said if you said no, at least I would know I tried." The words cut deeper than Dorothy's rebuke, deeper than any corporate loss. Bill Anderson, billionaire and master of empires, felt his walls crumble in the face of a child's quiet honesty, and in that instant, he understood that the storm that had begun in his boardroom was only the beginning. What awaited him was a reckoning far more powerful than anything his billions could shield him from. The storm outside the glass walls of Anderson Technologies had nothing to do with weather. By the time morning broke over Manhattan, it was no longer a whisper among executives, it was front-page news. Billionaire CEO confronted by child claiming to be secret daughter. The headline blared across blogs and tabloids, each retelling of the boardroom scene more exaggerated than the last. Reporters had gathered outside the skyscraper before dawn, cameras flashing, microphones raised, hungry for a quote. Employees pushing through the lobby whispered nervously, shielding their faces as paparazzi swarmed the entrance. Some carried the story like gossip, others like a loaded weapon. If the rumors were true, Anderson Technologies' fearless leader had a past he couldn't silence with money or power. Inside his penthouse, Bill Anderson sat with an untouched coffee cooling at his elbow, his eyes scanning the flood of notifications on his phone. Messages from board members, demands from investors, questions from partners overseas. Even his lawyers had already crafted draft statements, begging him to release something, anything before the markets opened. But Bill didn't move. His focus was on the bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon lying on the table before him. Ella had carried them in her backpack, preserved by her mother with quiet desperation. Bill's fingers hovered over them, but he couldn't bring himself to untie the ribbon. He had built an empire out of decisive action, yet here he sat, paralyzed by a stack of envelopes. Margaret appeared in the doorway, her presence as sharp as the tailored suit she wore even at home. "The press is circling like sharks," she said, her voice low but cutting. "The board is calling for an emergency meeting. You can't keep ignoring this." Bill looked up at his wife, the one person who had always steadied him, yet even she seemed shaken, her eyes heavy with sleeplessness. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. His voice was stripped of its usual certainty. "I don't even know where to begin." Margaret stepped further into the room, crossing her arms. "You begin with the truth. That girl upstairs, she isn't going away, and if you don't claim her, The world will decide what kind of man you are. Before Bill could respond, a soft knock interrupted them. Bobby, his loyal assistant, entered with his tablet in hand, his expression grim. Sir, it's already worse than we feared. Someone on the executive floor leaked it. Social media is calling Ella the billionaire's secret heir. Hashtags are trending in 20 countries. He hesitated, then added, Child Protective Services just called. Miss Patel, the social worker, wants to meet with you immediately. Bill's stomach turned cold. What do they want? They want to know your intentions. Bobby replied carefully, if you're denied paternity, Ella enters foster care Monday morning. If you're claiming her, there's a process. Background checks, custody hearings, supervised visits. It could take months. Margaret shot Bill a piercing look. She doesn't have months to wait in limbo. Bill, she just lost her mother. Do you understand what that means for a child? Bill rose abruptly, pushing back his chair. Do you think I don't know what this means? His voice boomed, but the anger was aimed at himself as much as anyone else. He turned toward the window, the city sprawling beneath him. For once, his empire seemed small, fragile, insignificant. When he spoke again, his voice cracked. Rachel begged me in those letters, didn't she? And I never answered. He picked up the bundle of envelopes, his hands trembling. She was asking for help, and I buried her words in a drawer because I didn't want the inconvenience. The weight of the truth settled between them, heavy and merciless. Margaret softened, but her tone remained firm. Then do better now. Whatever the cost to your name, your company, your reputation, you owe that girl upstairs more than silence. Bill opened the first letter. Rachel's handwriting spilled across the page in aching honesty. She's 3 now. She loves puzzles. She has your stubbornness. Bill, please, don't let her grow up thinking she doesn't matter. His throat closed. He flipped to another, written from a hospital bed. I never wanted your money. I only wanted Ella to know her father. If you're reading this, it means I'm running out of time. The room blurred. For the first time in years, tears cut down his face unchecked. Margaret placed a steady hand on his shoulder. You can't change the past, she whispered, but you can choose the father you'll be today. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed again. Thomas Bennett, his head of legal, texted, emergency board session. They want answers tonight. Bill closed his eyes, gripping Rachel's letters like a lifeline. Upstairs, Ella's laughter drifted faintly through the halls as Dorothy told her a story. The sound pierced the fog of his guilt, reminding him that the world wasn't waiting for him to decide, it was already moving forward. For the first time in his life, William Anderson realized the true stakes weren't his company's billions or his public image. It was whether a little girl with his mother's eyes would be forced into the system, believing her father had abandoned her just as her mother feared. And in that moment, he knew whatever it cost, his next move had to be more than powerful. It had to be human. The boardroom had always been Bill Anderson's battlefield, a place where he bent markets to his will and silenced competitors with a single decisive stroke. But on this night, the battlefield felt hostile in a way he had never known. Every face around the mahogany table was sharp with suspicion. Every whispered word a blade poised to cut. The emergency session had been called in haste. Yet all 20 members of the executive board had arrived, each carrying their own agenda. Outside the glass walls, Manhattan glittered in the evening dark, but inside, the air was suffocating. Thomas Bennett from legal began the meeting with the gravity of a surgeon delivering bad news. The story is everywhere, he said flatly. CNN, the Wall Street Journal, even international outlets. The narrative has taken root. Our CEO has a secret daughter, hidden from the public for 7 years. The merger with Westfield Medical is already wobbling. Their counsel called me an hour ago, asking for clarification. They don't want to be entangled in scandal. A chorus of murmurs followed, clipped voices overlapping, anger simmering just below the surface. We built this empire on your name, Bill, one board member said coldly. And now that name is poison. Bill sat at the head of the table, shoulders squared, but eyes heavy. He wasn't unshaven, wasn't disheveled. The world would never be allowed to see him undone, but his aura of control had cracks in his hand. He held Rachel's letters, the blue ribbon undone. Pages spread like evidence of crimes long ignored. I will not discuss this child as if she were a liability on a balance sheet, Bill said finally, his voice steady but quieter than usual. Her name is Ella Johnson, her mother, Rachel, passed away 3 months ago. Yes, Rachel and I were together years ago. I never answered her letters, and that is my shame. But now, the truth is here. She is my daughter. The room froze for a moment. There was only the faint hum of the city below. Then the eruption came, angry voices colliding, hands slapping against the table. "You've just admitted paternity before DNA confirmation," shouted the CFO, his face flushed with disbelief. "Do you realize what this means for the company? For shareholders? Do you understand what it means if the story breaks further and you backtrack?" Another executive snapped, "You'll look like a liar no matter what. This is ruinous." Bill raised a hand, and though his authority felt thinner than before, the room quieted. "I'm done lying. For once, I will not spin this. I am not hiding her existence. She is mine whether a test tells you tomorrow or not." The declaration sent another ripple through the room. Thomas leaned forward, his voice a warning. "Bill, listen to me. Custody law doesn't care about press releases. The judge will require DNA, home studies, background checks. This is a marathon. If you stumble publicly now, it will jeopardize everything: your family, the merger, your credibility." But Bill was no longer listening only to Thomas. He saw their faces. A gallery of men and women who had once revered him, now calculating whether his weakness might be their opportunity. For the first time, he realized his board wasn't merely anxious, they were circling, waiting for him to falter. Then, the doors opened. Bobby slipped in, his face pale, his hands gripping a sealed envelope. "Sir," he whispered, the word trembling on his lips. "The DNA results just arrived." The lab rushed them because of the media attention. The envelope landed on the table with a sound louder than thunder. The entire board leaned in, eyes locked on the single slip of paper inside. The verdict that would decide whether the empire stood or fell. Bill picked it up, his hand steady despite the storm raging in his chest. He broke the seal, unfolded the document, and let his eyes trace the words. 99.9997% probability of paternity. A hush fell so absolute it felt holy. Bill exhaled, the truth pressing down on him with both unbearable weight and unexpected relief. He lifted his gaze to the board, his voice iron once again. "You wanted clarity. There it is. She is mine, and from this moment forward, if you want to stand with me, you stand with her too." The CFO's jaw tightened. "And if the market doesn't forgive you," Bill leaned forward, his voice dropping to a lethal calm, "then let the market burn. I can rebuild money, but I will not abandon her. Not again." The silence that followed was not agreement, but no one dared challenge him further. The battle lines had been drawn, and for the first time in years, Bill Anderson wasn't fighting for profit or power. He was fighting for blood, for redemption, for the fragile bond of a daughter who had walked into his empire and shattered everything he thought untouchable. Outside, flashbulbs erupted in the night as reporters swarmed, waiting for him to emerge. Inside, a billionaire had just chosen a little girl over billions, and everyone in that room knew the world would never be the same. The ballroom of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel glittered like a cathedral of wealth. Chandeliers dripped with light, champagne flowed like water, and the city's most powerful men and women gathered in gowns and tuxedos to celebrate the annual Anderson Foundation Gala. This was the night when William Anderson traditionally stood before New York's elite and unveiled his grand philanthropic vision of performance that reassured investors, dazzled politicians, and elevated his name beyond mere business. But tonight, the air was different. The press had swarmed the red carpet, not to fawn over gowns and jewels, but to catch sight of one child. 100 cameras flashed as the black limousine pulled up, and when Bill Anderson stepped out, Ella's small hand tucked in his, the crowd gasped as if royalty had arrived. Margaret followed close behind, elegant in navy silk, her composure unshakable, though her heart thundered beneath her ribs. Ella, dressed in a green gown chosen by Margaret, clutched the silver locket that hung around her neck, the locket with her mother's photo inside. Bill felt the burn of questions hurled at him. "Mr. Anderson, is she really your daughter? Will this affect the merger? Does your wife approve?" Reporters pushed forward, their words sharp as daggers. Bill didn't flinch. He simply tightened his grip on Ella's hand and moved forward. "Ignore them," he murmured to her. She nodded, her chin lifting with the quiet dignity of someone far older than 7. Inside the ballroom, the atmosphere was no less tense. Senators, Fortune 500 CEOs, heirs, and media moguls filled the tables. Many smiled politely when Bill approached. but their eyes glittered with curiosity, with judgment. Whispers rose like static. That must be her. The girl. Look at her eyes just like his. Do you think Margaret will tolerate this? Well, the board survived the scandal. Bill led his family to the head table. For years, he had sat there alone, or with Margaret, untouchable, the emperor of the evening. But now, a child sat between them, swinging her legs nervously under the linen-draped table. Her small hands folded in her lap, she looked out over the sea of strangers with steady eyes. Thomas Bennett, his attorney, leaned in from the next seat. You don't have to make a spectacle of this, he cautioned in a low voice. Stick to the script. Announce the new education grants. Avoid personal references. The market is already volatile tonight, needs reassurance, not more fire. Bill stared at the cue cards on the podium. Perfect words crafted by his PR team. Statistics, achievements, promises, empty armor. He remembered Rachel's final letter, her words echoing, Ella deserves to know her father. And perhaps you're ready now to know her. The MC tapped the microphone, announcing, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the founder of Anderson Technologies, William Anderson. Bill rose, every step toward the podium feeling heavier than any speech he had ever given. The ballroom hushed, hundreds of eyes locking on him. For a moment, he glanced at the cards in his hand. Then he set them aside. This has always been a night about legacy, he began, his voice steady but softer than usual. About what we leave behind when money and power no longer matter. For years, I believed legacy was about building the greatest company, securing my place in history. But this year, something happened that changed everything. The crowd stirred, confusion flickering. This was not the speech they expected 8 months ago. Bill continued, his eyes sweeping the room. A little girl walked into my office. She interrupted the most important meeting of my career. She carried with her a photograph, some letters, and the courage to look me in the eye and tell me the truth I had been too cowardly to face. Gasps whispered across the room. Cameras tilted. All eyes darted toward Ella at the table, her face illuminated by the chandeliers. Bill's voice deepened, gaining strength. Her name is Ella Johnson. She is my daughter. Her mother, Rachel, raised her alone while I built this empire. Rachel worked double shifts, went to night school, and still found time to teach her daughter strength, kindness, and resilience. She did all of this while fighting an illness that eventually claimed her life. She was the real hero, not me. The room froze. Guests who had come expecting polished philanthropy sat stunned, watching a man strip away his armor in front of them. Bill's hand tightened on the podium. Tonight, in her honor, I announced the Rachel Johnson Initiative, an expansion of our foundation that will provide medical support, housing, childcare, and educational opportunities for single parents facing catastrophic illness. No one should have to choose between fighting for their life and protecting their child. Rachel did, and she should not have had to. The ballroom erupted in applause, some moved to tears, others clapping cautiously, weighing the PR brilliance of the moment. But Bill wasn't finished. Ella, he said suddenly, looking at the child at the table, would you join me up here? A murmur swept through the crowd as the 7-year-old rose, her green gown brushing the floor, her small steps echoing in the vast room. She climbed the stairs with quiet determination and slipped her hand into her father's. Bill knelt beside her at the podium, lowering himself to her level, so the cameras caught not a CEO towering over a child, but a man humbled by her presence. This, he said, voice breaking for the first time, is my legacy. Not Anderson Technologies, not the billions in our accounts. This child, and the woman who raised her with more courage than I ever showed, are what matter. Ella looked up at him, her eyes bright with tears she didn't bother to hide. Mom would be proud, she whispered into the microphone, her small voice echoing through the ballroom. The entire room rose to its feet. Applause thundered, cameras flashed, and for once, William Anderson felt no need to control the narrative. The truth was enough. Margaret watched from the table, tears in her eyes, her hand resting on her stomach where new life was quietly growing. She knew the world would still question them, the markets might punish them, the board might resist, but none of that mattered anymore, because tonight, her husband had chosen the one thing he had never chosen before, family. And though the world didn't yet know it, the most shocking reveal was still waiting, one that would turn whispers into history. The applause from the gala still rang in Bill Anderson's ears long after the ballroom emptied, long after the chandeliers dimmed and the city outside returned to its restless hum. He had stood before New York's most powerful and admitted a truth he had once buried, and for a moment, he felt lighter. Yet the real test was not the speech, not the applause, not the headlines. It was what awaited him at home, in the quiet, where no cameras could shield him and no words could disguise him. That night, the penthouse was unusually still. Margaret tucked Ella into her bed, smoothing the child's hair with a tenderness that made Bill pause at the doorway. The green walls of the once guest room glowed soft under the nightlight, shelves already filling with books and toys, the locket gleaming against Ella's chest as she whispered good night. Bill watched Margaret linger, her hand on the girl's shoulder, before joining him in the hall. She had a hard night, Margaret said softly. She carried the weight of that ballroom with more grace than most adults could, but it cost her. Bill nodded, but his eyes stayed fixed on the slightly open door. He wanted to say something, anything, but words stuck. For years, his life had been dictated by quarterly reports and stock prices, not bedtime routines or whispered reassurances. He felt like an imposter here, in his own home. Later, long past midnight, Bill sat alone in his office, the skyline, glittering backdrop behind him. Rachel's letters lay scattered across his desk, pages inked with the handwriting of a woman who had once believed in him. His fingers traced her words, each one a wound reopening. Then, from the pile, he noticed something different, a small envelope tucked deep inside the bundle, unaddressed, sealed with tape yellowed by time. His heart pounded as he peeled it open. The letter was not to him, it was to Ella. My sweet girl. It began, by the time you read this, I may be gone. I wanted you to know the truth that I didn't tell your father about you at first. Not because I didn't love him, but because I was afraid. He was powerful even then, and I worried he might take you from me if I gave him the chance. That fear kept me silent. It wasn't fair to him, and it wasn't fair to you. Bill's vision blurred as he read, but in the end, I realized something. A child deserves the truth of where she comes from, and the truth of who she is. You are strong, Ella, stronger than me, stronger than him. One day, you'll find your father, and when you do, don't be afraid. Look him in the eye and give him a chance to know you. He deserves that, and you deserve him. I believe he'll choose love, even if it takes him time. Bill pressed the page to his chest, his shoulders shaking. Rachel had carried both faith and fear to her grave. She had left the choice not to him, but to their daughter. Ella had found him because Rachel, even in her final hours, believed he might still be capable of love. The office door creaked. Ella stood there in her pajamas, eyes bleary from sleep. I had the dream again, she whispered. Mom was saying something, but I couldn't hear her. Bill rose, crossing the room, kneeling to her height. His voice trembled, but his words were clear. She wasn't trying to tell you something in your dream, sweetheart. She already told you everything. She trusted you to find me, and you did. Ella's small hands reached for the letter. She scanned the page, lips moving as she pieced the words together. Tears welled in her eyes. So she wasn't afraid of you in the end? No, Bill said, his throat tightening. She believed in me, even when I didn't deserve it. And she was right, because you gave me a second chance. Ella leaned against him, her little arms wrapping around his neck. I just wanted a dad, she whispered. Not a rich man, just a dad. In that moment, the walls of his empire, the stock markets, the board, all of it dissolved into irrelevance. Bill Anderson, once untouchable, finally understood what true power was. Not wealth, not influence, but the trust of a child who had every reason to walk away and chose instead to hope. The following morning, Margaret gathered them in the kitchen. Her hands shook as she set down her coffee cup. There's something I need to tell you both. Bill turned, bracing himself, but her eyes were shining, not sorrowful. I'm pregnant, she said simply. 8 weeks. Silence felt like a drumbeat. For years, they had battled infertility, endured treatments, and heartbreak. The dream of a child together had seemed unreachable, and now, here it was, life growing where despair had lived. Ella's gasp broke the stillness. Does that mean I get to be a big sister? Margaret laughed through tears, nodding. Yes, darling, you'll be the best big sister anyone could ask for. Ella clapped her hands, joy lighting her face. Then Mom was right, she said. I'd have a family again. She turned to Bill, her eyes shining. Now I have you and Margaret, and a baby too. Bill reached for his wife's hand, his daughter's hand, holding them both as if anchoring himself to the only truth that mattered. He had spent a lifetime conquering markets and building walls around his heart. Now those walls had fallen, replaced by something messier, fragile, but infinitely more real. Weeks later, the family stood at the ribbon cutting of the Rachel Johnson Memorial Wing at Queens General Hospital. Cameras flashed, dignitaries applauded. But Bill's eyes never left Ella's as she held the scissors with steady hands. Together, they cut the ribbon. The crowd erupted, but in Bill's heart, the only sound was Rachel's voice, carried through. Her daughter, she deserves to know her father. He had failed once. He would not fail again. And as the cheers echoed, Ella turned to him with that same brave steadiness she had shown in his boardroom months ago. She whispered just one word, the same word that had silenced him then, the same word that still had the power to undo him completely. "Man."